My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue?
Welcome to today's From Hurt to Healing listening session, presented by United States Senator Joe Manchin. Today is the second event in the series, and today we will have the unique opportunity to hear from very important voices in our community, our youth. From Hurt to Healing listening session is an opportunity to amplify African American voices and to encourage every West Virginian to think about how we can move forward to a more just and equal society. As we begin today's program, we'd like to begin with a prayer by Reverend Ronald English. Reverend Ronald English is a friend to many, lifelong pastor and community activists. In fact, he was present at the historic I Have a Dream speech presented by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who he was mentored by. Reverend English had the honor to present the prayer at Dr. King's funeral. Today, we are honored to be led in prayer by Reverend Ronald English.
May we bow. Eternal God, we are grateful for this time of gathering, for this time of consecration and conversation, but we most of all thank you for the time of clarification that will help us increase the quality of our connection. We are facing challenging and difficult times, but we know that the difficult times is what makes us conscious of our character, makes us grounded more in our purpose, and makes us more passionate for making the kind of change that we know is coming because it is already here. We thank you for the leadership. We thank you for the gathering of youth that have inquiring minds. And we ask that you would guide and direct our thoughts, our talk, and our walk. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend English. Next, we will hear from your United States Senator, Senator Joe Manchin, as well as Reverend Ronald English. Then we will hear from Dr. Shelvy Campbell, Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the Marshall University School of Medicine and Pharmacy, who will facilitate a discussion with our dynamic youth panelists today. At this time, it is my great honor to introduce your United States Senator here in West Virginia, Joe Manchin.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining me for the second installment of the From Hurt to Healing series. And it is my hope and my prayer is that this series sparks important and ongoing conversations that help us all move forward in a very positive way. As United States Senator, I remain committed to working with my colleagues, both Republican and Democrats, on legislative solutions to ensure every American has equal opportunities and treatment under the law, regardless of skin color. But as a human being who is heartbroken over what is happening in our country, I'm looking for ways to help move us from hurt to healing. At our core, I believe that Americans are committed to justice and freedom. However, the events of the last several months have made it clear we have so much more work to achieve this justice for every member of our society. To ignore our nation's complicated past does each of us a disservice. As a country, we have made many painful mistakes that have marginalized our fellow human beings, particularly our Black neighbors, in the incredibly painful ways: the Civil War, Jim Crow, segregation, police brutality, and so much more. It is past time to do what Americans do best: come together in times of crisis to move our country forward toward a more equal and a more just society. But in order to do this, we've got to be willing to step outside of our own life experiences, and most importantly, our comfort zones, to listen to the perspective of others. I've been trying to do this myself, and I want to listen, to change and to be an advocate for those who have been ignored or oppressed for far too long. We've got to be willing to take a brave step and stand up when things are wrong. I do see that happening across our state. We have seen peaceful demonstrations in Charleston, Huntington, Morgantown, Martinsburg, Elkins, and many places in between. I know many of these demonstrations are led by young people who are committing their passion and energy to this critical cause. Make no mistake, our young people are our future. All of you are here speaking your voice tonight are our future. That is why I'm so eager to be joined by Dr. Shelvy Campbell, the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the Marshall School of Medicine and Pharmacy, and a dynamic group of high school students. I'm also excited to learn from Dr. Campbell and her students and to hear their perspective on the issues facing our country today. These are the important conversations that will move us forward. And I thank each of our guests for joining us today. I'm always pleased to be joined again by Reverend English. If you tuned into our last listening session, you remember we were joined by Reverend English. I thank him for taking the time to join our important conversation again. So I've talked enough. Now it is time for me to listen, and I pray that tonight is another step towards letting our better angels fly. As Abraham Lincoln said, we are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. Thank you, and may God bless you and keep you all. And know we will hear, and know that we're going to hear from Reverend English now on his words of wisdom. Reverend English.
Thank you, Senator Manchin, and my delight once again to be a part of this conversation. And I want to say that our notion about going from hurt to healing recognizes that those things are interconnected, that we cannot have healing unless we acknowledge the hurt, and we cannot find our purpose unless we have gone through some pain. And so these things have really shown how interrelated these connections are, and also how it has really brought about connections across generations. One of the things that I have been most encouraged by in terms of the protests that have come out on the streets and in the streets is finding a new pattern of leadership that is emerging among those that are there. During the Civil Rights Movement, we were able to identify who the leaders were: John Lewis, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesse Jackson, and others. But in this response, it has come out of a visceral response from those that are really caring about making a change. And therefore, the leadership has really shown up out of the movement itself, out of the protest itself. And many of those have been young folk. And that shows something about how the energy can be directed in a very constructive path and a very constructive place. And I don't think that this energy is going to be lost, and I think it's going to be increased. And I think it's going to be maximized, and I am really excited about what that has happened. I lived through the Civil Rights Movement, and I know some of the things that were accomplished there. But I think that this is a more exciting movement because this is really moving us from a reaction, which we are seeing still continuing in a large way, but it's moving us toward a recognition of what some of the issues are beneath the surface that have been there much too long. And that hopefully will lead us to a greater awakening, and from a greater awakening and an awareness of those issues and those attitudes that have been under the surface, that we will really be about a time of reconstruction. And this will be a kind of second American Reconstruction, where we have really dug deeper into beyond the legal aspects, and we have found the moral ground for seeing how we are becoming a better people because we are making a better nation. And we have the confidence that a change is going to come because it has already begun. Thank you.
Terry?
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Thank you, Reverend English. At this time, we will be joined in our From Hurt to Healing session by Dr. Shelvy Campbell. Dr. Campbell, welcome.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Senator, for joining us, and Reverend English for your words. It is much appreciated. We're excited, and our healthcare pipeline pathway initiative, which is the School of Medicine's program created in 2013, created because we believe it's critical that we make progress on getting more Black doctors. We need more Black doctors, and we have to have pathways for those to make it into the schools of medicine, pharmacy, and other areas. So with this particular pipeline program, we're building our own. We're creating ways for students of color to recognize that there are opportunities within the STEM and health areas. Students participating in the Marshall University's Healthcare Pathway Initiative participate in activities this year virtually. Normally they're on campus for 4 weeks. This year is the first year that we're doing this virtually. And students get the opportunity to learn about all of the fields in healthcare, pharmacy, nursing, health informatics, engineering, and many others. This specific group of students are historically represented, underrepresented in the healthcare areas, as well as science and math. And they're using this opportunity to get a unique learning experience. These experiences are life-changing and will help them identify pathways to healthcare, pathways to the STEM areas. This particular healthcare pathway initiative is a collaborative venture between Marshall University School of Medicine, School of Pharmacy, Marshall Health, the Army Educational Outreach Program, Technology Student Association, Unite, and the Walgreens Diversity Grant. I have a great group of students this year, and I'm very proud that they're ready to ask the Senator questions. So with that, I would like to ask for our first student to present her question to the Senator. Nevaeh.
Hello, Senator Joe Manchin. My name is Nevaeh Good, and I will be attending. Hi, I will be attending St. Joseph High School in Huntington. My question is: with about 4% of the population that identifies Black or African American, how can we enforce training among the police so that we could prevent another accident like the one George Floyd, so it would never happen in West Virginia?
That's a very good question. I thank you very much for participating and being involved and caring. The bottom line is we're debating a bill. We should be debating a bill, and we're having a hard time getting on that bill in Congress right now. And it's exactly what it would pertain to is the proper training. First of all, you have to recruit and recruit properly to the dynamics of your state and the places and the areas. So basically the people who are enforcing the law look like you and me, look, and the areas that they police. The next thing is to have the proper training. And that's not always done. And then what we call is recurrent training or continuing education, if you will. I think the rest of your life, you'll be continuing to educate yourself, but everybody else does in their profession because things change. They change on an annual basis, on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, and on a daily basis. And we have to be prepared for that change. As divided as our country is today, there's a way that we can heal it. And we can only heal it if we come together and understand. I think of my grandparents. I've always said this: we're all a product of our environment. You are who you are by who raised you, how they raised you, and where you were raised. And if there's love and unconditional love, that's a pretty special child. You're privileged. If you know every day you have somebody that loves you unconditionally, right or wrong, they're going to be there for you. Not everybody has that. So we have to be, we have to break down the stereotype of unconscious bias. I don't want to think that people have this hatred in them, this racist streak in them. I want to think that they're basically unconsciously biased because they don't know any better. It's how they were raised or where they were raised. We need to educate them. And we need to make sure our training and our police officers basically have to pass these types of rigorous training in order to be able to wear a badge and carry a gun and protect us all. And they're paid by your and my taxes to protect all of us equally. They shouldn't be protecting you or me any differently than anybody else, no matter what we look like, no matter where we come from. And that has to be ingrained and changed, basically, in West Virginia being mostly a white populated state. My grandparents came here. I'm the second generation. They came here from Europe in the early 1900s. We know what the conditions of basically biased is and how they were looked upon and the type of opportunities they have, but they were able to forge forward. But the color of the skin has been a barrier that basically is unconscionable to anybody that is not a color and is not a skin color. And I was fortunate enough to be raised in a little community, Farmington, West Virginia. Really didn't care what the color of your skin was because everybody had to work hard. They went in the coal mines and made the same amount of money, lived the same way. And everybody got along. And I love that. I kept thinking back, I was so sheltered and privileged to not have that hatred or bias or racist in my little area. My parents and grandparents would never tolerate it if it was there. But we need to train out of this bias that we have. And I'm going to call it an unconscious bias. So I give people the benefit of the doubt, but if, be very frank with you, not everybody should be in uniform. Not everybody should be carrying a gun, wearing a badge, and have the authority to do what they want to, and police as they think is appropriate. That's not what this is about. And we're going to change that. It will change. It's changing, hopefully, through a peaceful movement, because it will not change through violence. Reverend English, you might want to touch on this briefly if you can.
Yes, Senator Manchin, I thank you for the opportunity of touching on that. And I think you struck one of the major chords in terms of unconscious bias. I've shared this story in police training that I've done, and I share it very briefly here. I came from down south to up south several years ago, but I remember a situation down south when I was a student at Morehouse, and I was working my way through school and had a janitorial service. And one of the places where I served and cleaned up was in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And I was on the way back from that job after I finished, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was riding in a red dot at the time. And for some reason, that red dot must have been fascinating to a state trooper, because he stopped me and pulled me over. When I asked why I was being stopped, he frankly told me, "Nigga, I don't have to have a reason to stop you." And then he slapped me on the hand with his flashlight, and then told me to get out my credentials and what have you. He did find that I did have a expired insurance, and therefore he told me to get into the back of the paddy wagon. Well, in those days, when you were invited to get in the back of a state patrolman's car, you were not sure whether you were going to arrive at your destination or not, particularly in Stone Mountain, which was Ku Klux Klan territory. I was terrified. I was really glad when we did arrive at the jail, because even though it was a jail, it served to be a safer place than other options that could have led me in that situation. So I had that notion in my head about state troopers. Fast forward until the time that I came up here to West Virginia, and my family, I took my family to New York, and we were coming back down I-81 back into Charleston. And at that time, I-81 had not been completed, and I forgot to get some gas. And when I got through Clarksburg, I discovered that I did not have enough gas to get to Charleston. And therefore, I decided to pull over in a safe place rather than try to park on the side of the road, and I did. And that safe place happened to be the territory or the grounds of a state troop, of the state patrol. I felt that was a safe place. Well, a light came on in the patrolman's office, and he came out still with his, in his uniform. And I went back to thinking about what had happened in Stone Mountain, Atlanta, and I was fearful that it might happen again. And with my family in the car, I was definitely concerned. To my surprise, he came up to my window, flashed his light in, which was an immediate impact on me and the family. But when he flashed it light, he asked, "Can I help you?" I was surprised by that trooper wanting to help me, well, as I was remembering how the other one wanted to hurt me. But I carried the impression of my first experience into the second one, which means that I was a victim of that kind of unconscious bias because of what had happened to me, that I carried it forward to the trooper that was really wanting to help me. I was grateful for his help, but I also learned from that experience that we carry these kind of biases around all of the time based on our prior experiences and the experiences that have shaped our way of thinking. And so that is a part of what our challenge is, to rethink our way of thinking, because structures have caused us to think in a certain way, and therefore behave in a certain way. And therefore, there are certain reactions that we make in certain situations that are by default based on our experience. And so the training, particularly of the police, has to go beneath the structured training that they have, because it is designed for them to be warriors. And it needs to have the kind of training that would help them to be guardsmen, which is a part of what I remember the police did in the better days of my youth, and that was they were guardians in the community that we looked up to. And so that is the kind of training, but that is also the kind of awareness that we have to come to in terms of dealing with structured situations that cause unconscious bias, and how that is a ongoing work in so many dimensions of our lives.
Thank you, Reverend English, and thank you, Senator, for your response. Nevaeh, good question. Second question will be from Jacob. Jacob, your question for the Senator.
First off, I'd like to thank the Senator and his associates for being with us today. And it means a lot to us that someone can listen to our opinions. So, here's my question. Do you feel like political isolation, or the state of being far left or far right politically in order to please your audience, has pushed us backwards in terms of racial equality or coronavirus?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for this, for the very thoughtful question. And there is no question, absolutely it does. Let's simplify this way, Jacob. You don't live your life from the extremes. You're not on the far edges. If you are, you won't accomplish much. There's too much pushback, okay? But when you have political leaders that basically not only espouse this, but kind of show it in their actions, that it's okay to divide. If you're a Republican, all the Democrats are bad. If you're a Democrat, all the Republicans are bad. They have no good ideas. I've never met anybody that I thought had all the answers, and I never met anybody that I thought was always wrong. So I need the input from everybody. But I've just never seen any. This is not how I was raised. It's not how I've run my life or my family or my friends and associates. It's not how I do things. So it has definitely put us backwards. Leadership, you know, the best definition I've ever heard of leadership, it was a young 12 or 13-year-old girl in junior high. I was a Secretary of State. We were asking questions and just talking, having a conversation. They were wanting to know about leadership, and it was a social science class. So I asked, I said, what do you consider a leader? And they said, well, a leader, you know, has to do certain things, and they have to get people, show them how to do things and make sure that people will follow them. The one little lady stood up and she says, I believe a leader should be a dealer in hope. If leadership doesn't give you hope, I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what your political background or affiliation is. I don't care what your religion is. If we can't give you hope that you and you alone have the same ability in this great society of ours with a democracy, that you can be anything you want to be. The only thing can stop you is your mind. Nothing else. If that's the American dream. If we don't have hope in your generation, and I and all of you all, if you don't think you can do what you want to, and the only thing that will ever stop you is you not believing in yourself or not thinking you can. It's not going to be me telling you you can't, and it shouldn't be anybody else telling you can't. And you know what the rules and regulations, and you live within that guideline. If you want to push the envelope to the right and the left, I'll guarantee you, you'll bring problems and trouble upon yourself. So I think it's horrible, the tone that's been set today from the most powerful leader in the world, our president, down to all of us. If we can't show that there's a more of a conciliatory way to work through problems, and that's by listening, and this is what I'm trying to do. I want to learn more. I want to be a better person. I want to make sure that I don't have an unconscious bias. I sure don't think I do, but I want to make sure. And I want to make sure other people are educated that they don't have it anymore either. So when you're talking to politicians and when your person's asking you for their vote, and I hope all of you will get involved in the political process because you all have something to give back. But you have a responsibility too. This is your government. It's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And if the people accept what's going on, and shame on all of us. If we don't, and we push back in a very orderly, mannerly, and professional way, we can make changes, big changes. You're going to have a chance this November to make a big change. And picking people that you think will be able to accept you as who you are, not what they want you to be, but who you already are. And then that's who we are. That's, you know, I never thought coming from a little coal mining town of Farmington with 400 people that I would end up being governor of the state of West Virginia and being a U.S. Senator. Never gave it a thought. Never thought it was possible. But nobody ever told me it couldn't happen. No one ever told me it couldn't happen. So it was only me holding myself back until I believed that I could. And then having other people that believed in me and working with people and hopefully making a better life and making changes. And, you know, the greatest joy I get today, still today, is if I can do just a bit of kindness for someone that makes their life a little bit better. That's my greatest joy. That's public service. And there's not a West Virginian that can't tell between self-serving and public service. Inherently, you know who's in it for themselves and who really cares about you. My grandmother would say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So always remember that. Don't talk through people. Don't talk over them. Talk to them. That's the most important thing, and people will know. So yes, I'm very much concerned. I think the polarization has hurt us because you know why? When you have a president or any leader that's so divisive and espouses division, that means it's acceptable, and it pushes people further apart. When you have people say, we are not going to tolerate the divisions that's going on. We're not going to tolerate the inequality that we have. We're not going to tolerate this anymore. And everybody, there's an old saying that a rising tide lifts all ships. We need to have that tide rise and lift us all to a better West Virginia and a better country. So thank you, I appreciate it. Reverend English, you have anything as you can help us with your words of wisdom on this one?
Yeah, very, very quickly. I think that the definite divide is very pervasive and destructive. And it also comes from the kind of either or thinking that you have already referenced in terms of one side is right, the other side is wrong. The other thing that I see in that is that when we recognize how deep the divide is, sometimes that might help us to recognize how we are connected, or that the possibility of connection comes in terms of those things that we are profess to be confident in, and that is in our Pledge of Allegiance: one nation under God, indivisible, you know, with liberty and justice for all. But we just kind of pronounce those words, and they become something that we just kind of do as a matter of pronouncing them. And these kinds of situations cause us to see how deep that divide is and how far we are from living the pledge that we have recited by head and really living it by heart. And I think that the wider the divide is, and hopefully we can be optimistic of saying that that helps us to see how much we need the connection, then the divide has really served a kind of a purpose of showing us how much we need the connection and how much we need to dissolve this kind of either or thinking to become more connected by way of thinking in a non-dualistic way, and seeing how, were it not for the divide, we would not see the need for coming together. Were it not for the crisis, we would not develop our character. And were it not for the things that we find difficult, would we find solutions. And I think that that's part of what I'm mostly very optimistic about now.
Thank you. Terry?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Reverend English. I have the next question, which is from Ajale. Question, you have the next question for the Senator.
Hello, my name is Ajale Corden. I will be a senior at Capitol High School next fall. Again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out your day to interact with us. And my question is, with the civil unrest following protests and rioting around the country, as a U.S. Senator, what do you see your office doing to help support the Black Lives Matter movement? And what suggestions would you have for local leaders to help address the systemic racism?
First of all, thank you again for such an intelligent question, because this is exactly what we're doing today. We're listening. We're trying to have a conversation based on the differences that we might have, because we don't even know the unconscious differences, or as Reverend English says, the unconscious bias that people might have because they just don't know. I've always said this: it is easy to say no to someone you don't know. It's hard to say no to someone you know or your friend. You always want to try to bring them together. You want your friend to like you. You want to be able to work with them through their troubles and problems. So listening is the greatest thing we can do. And that's why we came up with the Hurt to Healing. This is the second program that we've had. The first program we had African-American religious leaders. And they were with us, and Reverend English and I worked together, came together on this, and thought it would be a great way to bring our state together so we would understand better. Being mostly a white state with very little diversity, it's a challenge that we have, but it's a challenge that we can overcome, because I think most all West Virginians have a good heart and soul. They want to do right. They want to do good. They want to be your friend if they know how. Sometimes they're intimidated. Sometimes they just don't know. So I want to make sure by opening these, the next one we're going to have is going to be basically our African-American law enforcement, what they have to endure, what they have to deal with on a daily basis within their workforce and their colleagues, and also out in the public. All these things, if we don't listen and understand what each one of us, is going through, what our daily lives are like, and what has come forth in the last couple of months. I have we have 3 African-American senators, which are all my friends. Tim Scott is a Republican. Cory Booker, a Democrat, and Kamala Harris, a Democrat. All wonderful people. We're trying to get through a piece of legislation of changing how we police in America, how our authorities treat all of us, or they don't, and we want to make those changes. And they both have different ideas, and I think they should be the leaders because they're the ones that have endured. Tim Scott has spoken many times on the floor. Being a United States Senator, he's been stopped coming into the Capitol. Why? He has the same pin I have on. They can identify him by the pin he has on. That's a very prestigious little pin we wear. Not very many people have ever had it in the world. So when they see it, they know what they're dealing with. But yet he was still stopped and questioned, had to show identification. Why? Okay, I would have never known that if Tim hadn't told us. And Tim would have never said anything about it until he wanted to start sharing why change has to come. In the Capitol, United States Capitol, it has to happen. Not just here, but everywhere in America, whether it be in Charleston, whether it be in Huntington, Fairmont, Farmington, no matter where it would be, change has to come because we're all in this together. You're a fellow American citizen, and I'm your American citizen also, your patriarch, if you will, from that standpoint. I have a little age on you, but with that, we're all in this together, and we all should make life a little bit better for each one. I keep thinking of people who have racist mentality, or basically they're prejudiced against certain things or certain people, and they don't even know. They don't even know why. They just know they are, and we're trying to change them. So I say, speak up when you see something wrong. You can't make wrong right. You have a moral compass inside of you. You know when someone's being treated unfair. And speak up. Don't let it happen. Just don't. So this is what we're trying to do, is get across everybody. It's all of us. We all have to be responsible for our own actions, but we have to be responsible to take action when needed. And that is in a peaceful way, speaking up for those who won't speak up for themselves or can't, and making sure there's not discrimination of any kind, shape or form. Sexism, racism, any kind of discrimination cannot be tolerated in this great country of ours. And it starts one place at a time. So what I'm doing is using my platform. As a U.S. Senator, I can get the press and talk to the press, and they'll want to quote me on something. And I'm going to speak out on what I think is wrong. For some reason, you're not seeing many West Virginia politicians speak out on this, on racism and the issue. Is it because they don't think there's much of a population that can harm them political? I don't know. I like to see the better angel inside of them speak up because it's just wrong. It's just totally wrong. And I hope people do the right thing. Okay.
Thank you, Senator.
Reverend English, anything yet?
No, just quickly, one of the responses 3 years ago when the first Black Lives Matter movement began generating response was, well, all lives matter. Well, that was a given. I mean, the reason that Black Lives Matter came up was because it seemed like they did matter. And that way it really raises the question of what we understand it means to be human, as far as all lives matter, and Black Lives Matter in particular, because that has become a universal affirmation that I have been encouraged to see all across the world in response to George Floyd's death, that Black Lives Matter posters have been showing up in England and Germany and in other places. So it shows that that is a universal affirmation of Black Lives Matter.
Thank you, Reverend English, and thank you, Senator, for your responses. And Alize, thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Our next question will be from Kayla. Kayla, you have a question for the Senator?
Good afternoon, Senator Manchin. My name is Kayla Lawson, and I go to Liberty High School in Raleigh County. We appreciate you for listening and answering our questions today. So, in my opinion, I feel as though we as a whole are putting the economy above our people. On March 25th, in a Fox News interview, you stated, "And it looks like we're worried more about the economy than we are the health care and the well-being of the people in America. How can we change this to where the people in America feel they come first?"
Well, the people have to know what's going on and have to speak up. And they can speak up in many, many different ways. The best way to speak up is go to the polls and vote and let people know exactly the inequalities in this country today is intolerable. The income inequality, the quality of life, the middle class, the people, the average person has fallen far behind in the last 2 to 3 decades. And it's very obvious. You can track it very easily. So when I said what I said is because when I saw the CARES package to try to help through this coronavirus we had, it was written by Wall Street lobbyists. It wasn't written by policymakers that would make America better. Everything was geared towards how do we recover this. And I said, this piece of legislation is not about the Main Street or the economy of the average person or the well-being. It's about Wall Street. And we fought back on that and wanted to make sure if we're going to help people, let's make sure it gets to the people that are in need, not the people that are led by greed. And that's what we were fighting, and that's what I continue to fight. But how do you change? Well, we change it basically by demanding that the opportunities that we have are fair. There's laws that we abide by, and everyone's treated equally and fairly. That's why we have, Reverend English said, you know, the first movement of Black Lives Matter, the first time we heard the word Black Lives Matter, the first reaction was, yeah, really, all lives matter. Every life is important. I like to think everyone feels that. But not knowing and being basically not in the African-American community or a skin of color, we didn't really know what they were speaking of. It was basically a lack of knowledge that we had, you know, the challenges. And now that we've seen it come forth the way it has now, it has changed. When we saw Mr. Floyd and the whole world was able to see what happened to him, every fiber in your body as a human being should have been boiling. No one, no matter what their background, no matter what they've done, no human being should be treated that way. And the person administering that type of pain and punishment looked as if that was my duty and my job. So what's everybody getting excited about? I could not believe it. It changed me. and it changed most of America, and it's changed people around the world. So I think it's time for us all to speak up. Absolutely. And we're not going to let this continue, not going to happen. I'm always concerned about the economy, but I'm concerned about an economy that has equitable in it. It's equal. It's basically open. An economy that you can prosper in, and your neighbors can prosper, your fellow classmates. Everyone should have the same opportunity. And basically, if you can't go to the bank and borrow money, or you can't go into a community and rent a space for your business because of the color of your skin, or maybe your sex, or you know, whatever your preference in life may be, you're a human being, you have a right. And we should not be able to discriminate against you for any reason, but it happens, and we have to change it. And if they're only worried about Wall Street economy, not Main Street, and not the average person that's working every day to survive, and we keep going backwards, we're going to continue to have troubles. And I believe very strongly that that has to change, and I believe it will. Reverend English?
Senator Manchin, I want to give you an amen on being, I think it would take somebody from West Virginia to kind of push for the Wall Street as over against Main Street, and push for Main Street over Wall Street. And that makes sense in terms of how the background has really made that kind of difference. And certainly I think that the kind of recommendations and the kind of forward movement that you have already suggested is the path that we need to go, because it really challenges some basic convictions as far as who we are and how we value life.
Let me give you one more example of that, if I can, and if you'll indulge me on this. We sent $1.25 billion for every state out of the first CARES package to help everybody in our state with the virus. $1.25 billion. To date, our governor of West Virginia has only distributed less than 1% of that. Less than 1% for the little communities and towns and people that are fighting, our first responders, the little towns we have in cities that need to stay afloat, the counties. And don't ask me why. And I've been putting pressure, and every time I say something, they try to say it's political. It's not political. Do your job. Why do you think you're gonna let the money sit in the bank? You know if that money's still in the bank at the end of the year, it goes back to the government, federal government, and the people that needed the help don't get it? First responders, 911 operators, whether you have policemen, whether you have basically small towns he can give grants to help them through difficult times. He has all the flexibility to do that. So you have to speak up. You have to be involved. You cannot sit on the sideline, or you will have inaction that'll basically change your life and not for the better.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Reverend English. And thank you for the question. The next question, or our fifth question, is from Haley. Haley, do you have a question for the Senator?
Yes. Good afternoon, Senator Manchin. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I would also like to thank your staff as well for arranging this meeting with us, and to Reverend English as well. It's been such a privilege to talk to you today. My name is Haley Cox, and I am a senior from Shady Spring High School in Raleigh County. I have a few questions to ask you if you have the time and don't mind to answer. I would like to talk about the coronavirus. My first question is, as our former governor, would you have handled the COVID-19 situation differently than Governor Justice has? And if so, how?
I never want, when we're right in the middle of a pandemic such as we are, to criticize anybody, but I can tell you, you know, there's two things that you have to be very careful of when you're governor and prepare yourself for. One is a crisis and one's a mandate. If the citizens give you a mandate to take care of something, then do it. If you have a crisis, be prepared. The first thing I did when I was governor, I took my oath of office and I met with everyone that I had as far as the emergency response. I said, give me the greatest danger the citizens of West Virginia face, and how do we protect them? Whether it be flash floods, could be a road tornado, could be a mine disaster, could be so many things that could affect us. And we try to be prepared for that. So if you're always thinking about how I can relieve any of your suffering, That's my job. That's my first and foremost job, to protect the citizens and uphold the Constitution of the state of West Virginia. So the first thing, the only thing I can tell you is I would have immediately, when specifics and professionals. And one thing I do say that the Governor Justice did, and I'm very appreciative of, he brought on Clay Marsh, Dr. Clay Marsh, a dear friend of mine, WVU, well thought of. He understands it, he gets it. And as long as those who don't know pay attention to those who do, sometimes you're better off, you'll get by. But with that being said, I would have done massive testing. I would not ask a person to go back into the workforce unless they were tested. I would not let them go back into the workforce unless they had PPE, which is personal protective equipment. That means the mask, the face, whatever you are. We had dentists, we were asking dentists to open back up. We were asking parlors and hair salons, and they didn't even have their own protection for themselves, let alone for the citizens that came in. That should be done, and that should be expected. I shouldn't ask you to go into a workplace and you don't even know if the colleagues around you have been affected or not. And then you're supposed to go in and work with these people and then go home and not knowing if you might have someone with underlying health elements at your house. That should be the first thing. The next thing is basically, how do we relieve the amount of suffering that's going on in every community economically? When we bring people back to work, are we doing it in a safe manner? And I would just say that basically every place of business has the opportunity and the responsibility to require wearing a mask and protecting yourself. If you're a customer, if I'm going to have my employees protected because they're working there, don't you think they should be protected also when you come in off the street? Just little things. I know it's controversial, but until we get a vaccine that we know that works, or we have immunities that we know that work, how am I supposed to keep you safe? That's my responsibility. But we can't keep the economy closed down forever. I understand that. And I can't just say it's not how I was made and it's not my nature to just think, well, you know what? People are old, they lived a good life, God bless them. No, there's still a lot of productive years and a lot of giving and caring in each one of us, no matter how young and old you are. So every life, every breath is so precious. And I don't know. I think because of my upbringing, I would have handled it a little differently. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to criticize at all. Everybody has their own way of doing it. But I can tell you, people need to know exactly what's going on. And we kept saying, well, we didn't have many cases. We never tested anybody. It's like President Trump saying, we've got all these things happening in America because we're testing. Quit testing. Well, that's like you got a problem in your life, you got a problem in your family, you got a problem in your workplace, and you're not willing to sit down and work through your problem. You want to hold it in until it explodes and you go off like a rocket. It's horrible. So you've got to face it and you've got to come to grips with it and figure out a way to do it. But if in public service, every job that I've had, the first and foremost thing is, how can I keep people safe and help them protect them? So that means your life, your safety. And if you have people around you understand that, then there's a plan for everything. And for us not to have a plan for a pandemic, because I assure you, the pandemic we have today will not be the last pandemic you'll see in your lifetime. And if we're not prepared, and if we're not making the equipment in America, and if we're not manufacturing to protect America, then God help us. And if you don't learn anything from it, I guarantee you, if you can't learn basically from the experiences you've had or from history, you're sure to repeat the mistakes you've made. Okay. Reverend English, you might not want to comment on that one.
Well, you've done well, sir.
I'm going to leave you out of that one.
Haley, do you have a second question for the senator?
Yes, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I'll ask you one final question. During this pandemic, we have seen disparities in healthcare access. One example being the situation at the Friendship Baptist Church that's near your hometown, near Fairmont, where members of this particular church struggle to find resources to take care of their outbreak of COVID-19. How do we ensure that all people of all races and of all backgrounds have equal access to healthcare services?
Well, first of all, you know, Terry Berkeley, Terry's been our moderator here, and Terry works with me. She's a wonderful, wonderful person, and she's from the same area I'm from, Marion County, the Fairmont area. I know those people very well. But basically, if you have an elderly population, if you have a poor, if you have a minority population, they're not going to have those same services. And then they say, well, go to your doctor. Well, let's say you don't have a family doctor, okay? And then they're going to say, well, bring your medical card with you, or bring your insurance card to get tested. Wait a minute. We just appropriated $25 billion for free testing. Now you're going to tell me how to pay for it? It's ridiculous. So we had to push, and Terry got involved. We all jumped in, made sure with the National Guard that we could test in all of our challenged neighborhoods, communities, any areas at all, to stay on top of this. And then doing the tracing after we found out we had, in Morningstar Baptist, I used to call it that. They changed the name, but these are all my friends. But and then once we found we had our first death in the state came from there, came from the church. And now we just see another outbreak in some of our churches again. And people want to be together. They want to worship together. But we have to be very, very careful. Reverend English, I know, can speak on this very eloquently. But there's just not a situation to where access and protection, I don't care what your income inequality, what your income is, but the inequality as far as in economics and money is one thing. Inequality in care is intolerable. And that's why I supported the Affordable Care Act. They want to call it Obamacare. I didn't think it was perfect, but it was a heck of a lot better than what we had. Okay? We can make it and fix all the bad parts, but because of politics, they don't want to fix it. If you fix something, you got nothing to complain about. Can't campaign against somebody who did something wrong. And that's what's holding us back from fixing the inequality in healthcare delivery system that we have. Okay? Reverend English, I know you can help us with this.
No, I'll move on to the question. I mean, I know the time is of essence, and I think
okay.
Very well on that. Yeah.
Thank you both. We have another question from Varenchi. Varenchi, do you have a question for the senator?
Yes. Good afternoon, Senator Manchin and staff and Reverend English, and thank you for your time. My name is Varenchi Kani. I go to George Washington High School in Charleston, West Virginia. Approximately 13% of the police force in the U.S. is African American. Do you feel that there's a difference in treatment between white and minority police officers? And how do you believe African Americans employed by the police force feel during these times with police brutality being exposed against minorities?
I'll answer the last part first. I can only imagine the empathy and sympathy they have because they've endured it themselves when they weren't in uniform, probably. Not knowing what they've gone through in uniform is exactly the reason, is the reason we're going to do our next Hurt to Healing based around the minority police force. I want to hear from them. We just don't know. I don't know. I need help there. And I'm sure Reverend English might want to comment on this a little bit more than me, but I can't wait to our next Hurt to Healing to find out what they're going through, what they endure, how their job is it looked upon differently than what the whites. They expected to do different types of jobs. And I don't know. I hope not, but we're going to find out. Reverend English, do you have any input on this one? I know you do.
Yes, Senator, I look forward again to actually talking with some officers because that's something that I don't know, but I do have some hunches about what officers may feel and also some issues that are realistic. Shelvy and I, from another generation, but I think she remembers this song they used to sing. They used to start, I feel so black and blue. And that's a metaphor also in terms of how I think some officers feel both black and blue. And black and blue also is another metaphor for being bruised and being hurt. And when officers are in charge with trying to bond together in terms of how they are united in a front as far as how they advance. It goes back again in terms of how officer training has been primarily in terms of a warrior mentality rather than a guardian mentality. And therefore, the warrior has a certain default in terms of how he responds to what he sees as aggression. And that default response can be deadly force. And when that deadly force occurs, then obviously it's something that is bound to be tragic. So that's one thing. But the other part is I noticed that the officers who arrested those young students in Atlanta, and this did surprise me, that 3 of them were Black. So I began thinking about that aspect of Black and blue being something that is really burdens or affects Black officers possibly in a different way, because they are also aware of how they have experienced it. And some officers have gone into law enforcement because of some good situations that they live with, some models that they follow, but also because of some abusive situations that they have lived with at the hand of the police and wanted to be in a situation where they could hopefully change that. But I think that that's a dimension that really is a very, and I feel for those officers in that sense, because I know that that feeling of being Black and blue is a really tough place to be right now. But I hope that the training that we're talking about will shift more toward seeing officers as guardians rather than officers as warriors. Because my first experience with a Black officer growing up in Atlanta was seeing him as a guardian, because I also saw him out of uniform at church on Sunday where he was an usher. And Officer Hooks was one of the first Black officers that was employed by the Atlanta police several years ago, when Atlanta police, Black police, could not arrest whites who were caught with an offense because they just didn't have that right. They had to call a white officer over to do that. So it's been a long history, a long complicated history of African-American experience in the police as Black officers.
Great. Thank you, Reverend English.
Thank you both. And our last question is from Kyla. Kyla, you have the question for the senator?
Yes. Hi, Senator Manchin. My name is Kyla Nickerson. I'm from Westerville, Ohio. That's outside of Columbus, and I'm going to Westerville South High School, and I'll be a senior. I just wanted to thank you and your staff for taking the time out of your day to come and talk to us. And my question is, freedom of speech is a valued American right, and Southerners exercise this right by waving the Confederate flag, claiming it's a part of their heritage, but ignoring the hateful connotation. So do you think the flag should be banned across the nation?
God, that's a great question. I'll share with you, 2 weeks ago, I was in a National Defense Authorization hearing. Okay, and it has to be done. We have to do that every year. So we sat there for a couple of days and go through amendment after amendment, what should be in the National Defense Authorization. And then it came to the point to where there was an amendment made that we should rename all of the military bases that had been named for Southern generals. Okay, and I didn't know a whole lot about, never thought about it, to be honest with you. The same as I never thought about the statues that were up, never made a difference. I never looked at them and idolized them and moralized them, didn't do any of that. But they were there and it didn't bother me because I didn't know any better. So Tim Kaine, Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia, Tim says, I want to share with you all. He says, I used to be the mayor of Richmond, which was the capital of the Confederacy. I was also the governor of Virginia, which was the state that held the Confederacy capital. And he says, I can best tell you that when I started and trying to learn more about what the Confederacy was about and when the war ended, what had happened, he says, what I did is, he said, I started reading Robert E. Lee, the famous general, Robert E. Lee. You all have heard of him, right? Famous Southern general. In 1869, Robert E. Lee wrote that he thought it was the wiser not to keep open the sores of war, but to follow the examples of those nations who endeavored to obliterate the marks of civil strife. His words were as true today as they were then. He never thought that we should memorialize or honor anything that reminisced a total civil breakdown in this country. And the Civil War did that. And with that, to memorialize that was wrong. That's the words of Robert E. Lee, not my words, even though I agree 100%. But I didn't know any better. Now that I do, and I know the wishes of Robert E. Lee, I think that basically anything that honors or memorializes the Southern insurrection of civil disobedience that we had in Civil War that we survived should not be continued to be memorialized or symbolized. And I don't know how to better put it than that. It was a lack of my education understanding why we had the things we did. The freedom of the First Amendment is so near and dear to all of us. But you can't go and holler fire in a crowd. You could say that's freedom of speech. Can't fire a gun outdoors at people. That should be exercising your Second Amendment rights. There's certain things you just can't do. This is one that we shouldn't do, and we should never have done. And when you think about when all of these statues and monuments and naming of military bases came about, it was during the Jim Crow era, way before my time. So it was there long before I became an adult to be able to understand the difference, and it wasn't spoken about. And now that we do understand, and now that we understand why Black lives do matter, because it's been so different and so hard and so challenging and so much understood. And now you're educating, we're all educating each other. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Reverend English, for so much for spending time with us today. We've certainly enjoyed your giving your wise wisdom and answering the questions, Senator, for our students.
So if I can, Reverend English, you have some parting thoughts on this?
Yeah, one quick parting thought. I always found it very interesting that the state of West Virginia seceded from Virginia, I think 1862. And so the first time that I saw the statue of Stonewall Jackson, that just kind of struck me kind of strange, because it was kind of giving credibility to those symbols and soldiers which were on the opposite side of what you would think that West Virginia succeeding from Virginia meant in terms of becoming a part of the Union. And so it just always has been one of those things that seemed like a curious contradiction of how that was that kind of allegiance in the state of West Virginia, who had succeeded from the Confederacy to become a part of the Union, and still seemed like that there was some attitude that stayed with the Confederacy in terms of how those statues and monuments and practices were venerated, and Civil War rehearsals and that kind of thing. So I think that that's kind of symbolic of how that was a kind of a choosing to forget what the impact of that war meant, and how it was causing people to still want to hold on to something that they had not yet released, even though they had succeeded from the Confederacy to become a part of the Union. So part of the discussion that is coming up today is help us to clarify our convictions in terms of what our arrival into statehood meant, even though we came in as a slave-holding state. So I think that this is a conscious cleansing kind of situation where we are really going back to see what it was that we were really succeeding from and what we wanted to make as a result of that withdrawal. And we are in process of kind of reconstructing what it was that withdrawal meant in terms of how we are handling the situations now.
Thank you. Dr. Campbell, if I may say thank you, and thank you for putting such an intelligent group of young people together with such thoughtful questions. And they're going to change the world. Yeah, I know they will. And we need them to change the world. We need them to be involved. You can't sit, you don't want to sit around and figure out what happened. You want to make sure that something does happen. And that's by getting involved. And all of you have that ability to do it. And Reverend English, thank you again, as always, for being with us. I want to leave you with this because there was something else that came out of that when I was doing a little bit of research on Robert E. Lee. Then I went right to Martin Luther King Jr., who I think all Americans should listen to. His words are as true today as they were then when he spoke them. Violence never brings permanent peace. It solves no social problem. It merely creates new and more complicated ones. Violence is impractical because it is a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. It is immoral because it seeks to humiliate the opponent rather than to win his or her understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than to convert. Violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love. It destroys community and makes brotherhood impossible. It leaves society in a monologue rather than a dialogue. Violence ends up defeating itself. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. And I would like to say that to end on that, we as West Virginians are better than what we're seeing in some parts of this country. We can bring change about in a most civil, obedient way. And it's because of the dialogue we're having now and educating those who have never had the privilege or don't understand or never had the challenges many of us had in West Virginia, especially our brothers and sisters of color. This is something that we all have to come to grips with. So I want to be able to submit to you or you submit to me any comments you might have. You can call our office at 304-342-5855, or you can get online and just email me at common_sense@manchin.senate.gov. That's common_sense@manchin.senate.gov. So may God bless each and every one of you, and thank you for being involved in this hurt to healing. And I'm hoping that we start this healing process and that we all come out a better person. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Shelvy, can I just end with, since Senator Manchin quoted Dr. King, I would just like to end with a very quick quote from his, and that is, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And that quote comes from his letter from a Birmingham jail. And I think that says it all in terms of how we have to be connected, particularly in this growing time of struggle. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Again, Shelby, thank you so much. We appreciate you more than you know.
Thank
Dr.
you.
English, we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
My only sin is in my skin. What did I do to be so black and blue?